It's not the usual crystal clear RC microphone, but it's good enough.
Okay, thanks. Going live in 2 seconds. And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021. I'll copy and paste the notes doc that you can follow along here in chat. Feel free to add yourselves as attendees. We'll be going through the agenda that was posted in issue 381 in the NPM RFC's repo. And yeah, I just want to quickly remind folks that these calls and all comms on the RFC's forum, or sorry, the RFC's repo, and all of our repos are under a code of conduct that we ask you to please abide by. On these calls, we ask that you please be kind and considerate as others are talking. Please raise your hand if you have a comment, and we'll call on you. And yeah, just hopefully we can have good conversations in these calls. So any quick announcements that folks had, things going on in the ecosystem they wanted to share? If not, I do have one announcement from our end. OpenJS World is coming around the corner, June 2nd and 3rd, as far as I know. Feel free to, if you haven't already, sign up as an attendee or follow along. I'm sure there's going to be lots of great presentations. Folks from our team are involved, and yeah, we're excited about the work that's being put into that conference and event, and hoping that there's going to be some great content come out of it. So just want to put a spotlight on that. If we're moving along here, the first item we actually had on the agenda is PR 375. So this is the RC that Isaac put together and quickly mentioned at the end of last week's RC call. Maybe you can go into a little bit more depth about what we've been up to since then, Isaac, and sort of like the impetus behind this work.
Yeah, so I believe actually Jordan has been the most frequent or vocal person bringing this issue up as far as workspaces and just kind of how it sets people up for undeclared dependencies very easily. And at the same time, anything if we fix that, if we change that, then there are things that ought to be tested together and ought to be shared that then won't be. So it gets kind of challenging. And so we have talked about this a few times in this context, but I just basically wrote that down. So there's a spec for which I didn't hear a lot of, didn't get a lot of like pushback on at least the rough strokes of it. But there at the same time, there is a proposal in the works coming from Vincent on the Microsoft side about something he's calling pure mode, which is basically a very PNPM-like approach to avoiding undeclared dependencies. And there's obviously a lot of overlap. So he and I have synced up on that. And where we kind of landed is both of our RFCs are somewhat overlapping and at the same time trying to do too much. So we talked it through, and it really should be three separate kind of much more tightly scoped proposals. The first one is what gets shared by default and what gets isolated by default, and just identify that there is a way to opt into one or the other, period. Like, we're not going to tell in that proposal, we're not going to talk about like what that syntax is, just sort of, if you opt into sharing it, then here's how it gets shared. If you opt into isolating it, then it will be isolated. And this is kind of the ramification of that from a, what can require what point of view, not even talking about like the implementation details at all. The second proposal is a syntax, and that'll cover both pure mode as well as workspaces, as well as, individually isolating, saying, I want this thing to be always isolated at this point in the tree and not ever hoisted. The second proposal is defining the syntax for how we specify that, whether that's a config or package JSON, or what have you, and then we can kind of just bike shed on like, how does the user express that they wish this thing to be isolated or this thing to not be isolated. And then the third is kind of defining the shape of the internal package store. What symlinks where? What are we hashing? What are the file names? And there's a fair bit of complexity just in that part, but I suspect it'll be less to kind of bike shed, because it's basically going to just be a matter of, does this meet the needs of the prior two RFCs? Yes or no? Then as we get into the weeds with the implementation, we may need to go back and kind of adjust or bring up new concerns for the first two. But I think this is kind of the most sensible order of operations, even though it's not like a strict waterfall per se. It's waterfall-ish.
Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, so pure mode to me seems like a bad idea. That's the reason PNPM and Yarn PNP break aspects of the ecosystem. There's tons of things that actually rely on the ability to require things or import things, I suppose, that are not explicit dependencies. So I definitely think that should be a separate RFC, and I don't think anything should be predicated on its existence. But the workspaces thing I'm asking for, really the ability to fine tune it as to which things are isolated and which are shared makes sense to me as a like a third RFC. But really, it's the thrust of my initial interest here is by hoisting everything to the root of the sharing of dependencies is conflated with the hierarchical nature of node modules, and like literally just making a separate folder, like node underscore modules underscore workspace or something, and doing everything exactly the same, and then symlinking the things that are that are in the root into the roots node modules like that. Even something as basic as that would, I think, work. But I think the important thing for me is absolutely not that a child workspace is restricted to requiring its direct dependencies. I think that is an anti-pattern. I think that the important thing is that a root dependency does not, or any of its transitives, a sibling child workspace dependency or any of its transitives do not become available to a child workspace that doesn't have them in its dependency graph. So I hope that's what I hope to see.
Okay.
So you touched on, I do want to, yeah, sorry, Wes, I know that the language can be tough to follow. I'm going to also hopefully.
I just meant that to point out to everybody, if the words that Jordan just said, while they are technically correct, don't make sense, like, don't worry. I think we're all in the same boat a little bit here. I'm going to figure that out before we communicate more widely.
We're gonna definitely have to sort of settle on some technical terminology on some of these. Just make it precise jargon in some of these cases. So I think. As far as, PNPM and Yarn PNP break the ecosystem and therefore pure mode is a bad idea, I think it is a bad idea to make the default for sure. But we have been asked for, very explicitly for a lot of the same reasons that you've brought this up with workspaces. We've been asked very specifically for we don't want to use PNPM because it breaks some stuff. What we want to do is use PNPM and just hoist this or that particular thing that needs to be hoisted, because it does provide some, even though it's really obnoxious, it's really inconvenient. It can provide some useful kind of detection of errors.
But it's also equally providable with configurability with the linter. Like there's no reason anyone has this as a problem. It just requires an extra tool, but that tool has been available for many years.
You can only catch it with a linter if you're the one doing it. what they want to do is actually detect these shadow dependencies in their dependencies and be aware of them.
Right, and to me, that is actively a bad want, because that is breaking the encapsulation barrier of their dependencies. That's none of their business.
Well, they don't want to have dependencies that are breaking the encapsulation barrier of working within PNPM, right? Like they want to be able to say, we only want, dependencies that have unlisted dependencies. That is a bug. We need to either go fix it for them or stop using that thing.
Right, and maybe within the PNPM ecosystem or Yarn, that is a bug. But I'm saying that is not automatically a bug in the NPM ecosystem, and there are valid use cases for it. And so I don't agree. Yeah,
that's why it is a feature you probably won't use and will not be on by default.
Well, right, but if any of my consumers use it, then I have to field a ton of complaints that my perfectly valid module is broken because they followed some naive tutorial and turned on a flag.
Okay, well,
I already get those complaints from Yarn and PNPM. It's just minimal because it's not the majority of the ecosystem. I don't want to get those from everybody.
It will still be minimal and not the majority of the ecosystem because it's not on by default, first of all. And second of all, the response can be, oh, well, just enable it with this flag. And that's a thing that NPM can actually even tell you like pretty easily.
I just want to say is to the default point, though, that that's what people said about type module and package JSON. And literally every tutorial from ESM and Node just naively tells you to use it without telling you why you don't need it or why you do need it or what the caveats are. And so everyone just uses it. And so despite the fact that it's opt-in, it's still effectively the default because of that property. And I suspect that would be the case because any flag like this would be marketed as, this fixes bugs, this is correct. Like this highlights broken dependencies. So I don't really buy that it's going to be minimal. I think it's going to be the majority. And I'll stop interrupting. I'm sorry.
The second point that you brought up as far as, well, we should have a node modules _, workspaces, and we should symlink things places like save that for the third RFC. We have some running code right now. Vincent's got some running code that works, and I don't know if we're just going to take it as is, but it's working on Linux and Windows right now, so that's kind of a good proof of concept at least. It will need a little bit of work to sort of fix or sort of come into line with where we landed in our discussion for where the spec is probably going to end up, but but yeah, we can definitely have those discussions, and I'll have a draft of all three of those coming up or at least the first two of those coming up soon. I think the first one is probably going to be the most juicy as far as bike shedding goes. The second one will be sort of the UX.
Can you name them instead of number them, because the ordering is not clear to me.
So the first one is what gets shared and what gets isolated by default. The second one is a proposal for specifying what is isolated and what is shared via some sort of configuration mechanism. And the third is a spec for the shape of the isolated dep store, what symlinks where, and so on. The actual like disk implementation of it.
Okay, I guess so you're saying that the first two would be more about the concepts and the user-facing thing, whereas neither of them would function until the third one was figured out.
Yes, but it gives us, it clearly defines the success metrics for that third one, rather than sort of saying we're going to implement a thing and then whatever it does is the spec.
Okay.
So it's also why I'm trying to use a language of like shared versus isolated rather than hoisted versus symlinked. Because I really do want to not get too much into the implementation weeds until we're very clear about what it is we want to happen.
So just to be mindful, since this RFC doesn't really touch on those other aspects yet, this is going to be probably ready by the next time, or at least, like you said, Isaac, the first two pieces that should be ready by the next time we reconvene here next week, I think, right? So we can actually speak to those hopefully next week, or at least maybe the first RFC will be put together.
Yeah, the third one will probably be a matter of like actually building and documenting a proof of concept and then discussing it, you know what I mean, as sort of a spike, because it's just it's hard to do that in a sort of ivory tower sort of way.
Okay. Any other comments on that then specifically, Jordan? Did you want to follow up, or do you want to essentially wait till again, this initial RFC was drafted. It's definitely not what is going to move forward based on everything you just said.
I mean, I'll definitely wait and see what gets written up. I mean, I think that, like, and based on what Isaac wrote up in the first case, which was the example syntax of configuring that nobody really liked, like, it sounds like the second RFC is the one that defines, will try to define that. And I think that's useful. I remain concerned if at any point someone can naively configure something that will create more noise for maintainers. I think that is, it is not anybody's business to fix the bugs in their dependencies without cloning that dependency and like developing on it.
I think
so. But with that feedback in there, I'll of course provide that again when the RFC is drafted.
Yeah, and just to be mindful, I think that the ideas that are being proposed here are also trying to fix the exact same thing that you're saying. Let's say I install two dependencies and one is able to manipulate the other. That is, you know, the strictness part of this was also part of the reason why I think Vincent Bailey, who we've been working with from Microsoft, has been pushing forward and trying to collaborate with us on something that would make sense to try to like prevent those types of use cases as well. So that also is a maintenance burden for maintainers that don't know why, let's say, your environment or the bug that you have is the way it is because, you know,
and there's lots of potential like ways out that we can work through on the RFC, like a package that has the use case of, you know, escaping the encapsulation barrier could declare itself as such, or vice versa, right? There's like, so we can certainly look into that.
Yeah. Cool.
And that's also, I mean, that's exactly why I think it's so important to tease these apart, because otherwise we get into like, you know, we get sort of up to our eyeballs in a particular implementation and then realize, oh, well, you know, there's this other thing that we need kind of an escape hatch for, and then we start having to kind of have stuff sort of duct taped onto it. I'd rather just identify those escape hatch needs up front and have a spec that we say, this is what we're doing and this is how it works. And then we can say, does this do what we said we're doing, and does it work the way we said it works, yes or no? That's a much simpler thing when evaluating the implementation.
Okay, just to be mindful of time, I'm going to move on to the second item we had, which is a issue, essentially a tracking issue that I've put on here. 37. Oh my gosh, I can't speak words. 372 discuss the NPM audit resolver need. So I think myself and Wes have been doing a bit of work in the package maintenance working group, but now we've spun up the package vulnerability collab space, which we had the first sort of kickoff call for. I think based on the fact that a lot of that conversation has moved over there, and that we're going to have hopefully a good space to essentially talk about, you know, security problems in general in that space, I think we can probably remove this from the agenda. I'm not sure, Wes, if you want to add any more like context around the work that we're doing there, or in prep for OpenJS World, I guess, even.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Sorry, I've been eating lunch, so turn the camera on and talk. Yeah, so I think the goal of that group is to come to some consensus that's not necessarily exclusive to NPM. I think what we would come back with would be a proposal that is something other folks could implement around, Sneak tooling, Yarn, PNPM, those other ecosystems. And if we can come up to sort of a core consensus on what the contracts need to be, we can come back with a better proposal. And I'm guessing it's going to end with a proposal to NPM. We're way early on that, so no promises. I think if that's not the way the conversation goes once we get everybody in the room. But I would like to. You're planning on leaving it open, right? You don't mean to close it, I assume.
I was actually going to close the issue for now. It was more so just because I was trying to track that we were talking about this. It's the topic name is not very descriptive. It was specific to ZB's implementation of NPM audit resolver, whereas like we could have a tracking issue if we'd like to continue to give updates here, like weekly updates, if we're making progress in that cloud space. But I don't think it's makes that much sense probably, since we're going to have a longer cadence in between.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I would work. ZB's not on the call today, right? I think not. Okay. Yeah, I guess my only reason of saying leave it open would be more that when folks come on to the the collab space, we can link them to this as some prior art. Maybe closing it with a big, nice message that just says, hey, we're going to be expanding on this in the collab space. We'll come back with something more, just so that people don't feel like that was a dead end and it was, closed out. Sure. Like it wasn't something we wanted, to continue with. So, yeah.
Sure, it's not closing the PR. I think the PR is still open. This was a separate issue for just tracking like needs. So yeah, but I'll provide that context, Wes, before I close it. So, and we're picking up essentially that prior art in that cloud space, right? So, cool. And if folks on this call are interested in that, interested in that work, I can provide some links as well in the meeting notes. And also in chat here in a few minutes if you want to take a look at what we're kicking off there. Moving on then to our third item was the PR 364, restore NPM 6's ability to install a single package. So I think we had some good discussion about this last week. I'm not sure if we decided on anything specifically. Isaac, you were the last one to sort of comment on this.
Yeah, I think this has to be an opt-in thing. We're not going to go back to NPM 6's way of doing it just inconsistently based on whether or not you have a lock file, because we do a lot of work to behave consistently in cases where you have a lock file or don't have a lock file. Yeah, what we need to do is say have a way to specify, like, I only wish to reify this node and its graph of dependencies.
Sorry, Gar, I see your hand up. I'm not sure if that was from before or not.
No, it's part of this. It's my turn.
Mm-hmm.
I may not understand the problem space here. Is the -- no lock file parameter the solution here? It doesn't work, but like, should that work? Should we just install this? Don't worry about the lock file, because that's the thing that changes the behavior is the presence of the lock file. If we were able to tell the CLI, don't worry about the lock file, does that solve the problem?
So the thing that changes the behavior in NPM v6 is the presence of a lock file. And the fact that it changes the behavior in this way was surprising to at least Rebecca Turner, who wrote most of that code that does that. It's not like by principle design. It's just sort of how it happens to be working. If you have a lock file already, then npm install foo will install your entire tree. And if you don't have a lock file already, npm install foo will not install your entire tree. It'll just install foo and not all the other things that your root project depends on. In npm 7, we're much more consistent. The root project always has its set of dependencies loaded into place, whether you have a lock file or not, because we read them from the package.json. And I certainly don't want to go back to the bad place of, install is a wildly different command, based on whether you have a lock file or not. It's just not a good place to be.
Well, if there was any possibility that we would want to have the npm6 no lock file behavior as the consistent always behavior, meaning when you ask for one package, you only get one package, then it seems to me that the inconsistent situation is better as a transition to the consistent only do one thing situation, right? Like if we switch to if we keep the npm7 behavior and then change both of them back in npm8, let's say, or 9 or 10 or something, then that seems like it causes more churn than going back to the inconsistent behavior now and then like dropping the with lock file behavior later.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, like that, the tremendous amount of work in order to preserve behavior, which is actively buggy and a source of bugs, I can't do that.
I mean, maybe that's the thing that that's hard to understand. Like, I understand that in npm6 it was unintentional that absent a lock file it did a thing, and that lack of intention might create a source of bugs. But I want to clarify: are you saying that when I ask to install one package and having it only install that one package, are you saying that's a source of bugs? The behavior?
That behavior in npm6. Well, more
Okay.
to the point, like the behavior of because it's not npm6 is not building out the entire ideal tree and then filtering it down to just reify the corner of the ideal tree that we care about. What it's doing is it's creating a node that has exactly one dependency and then reifying the tree.
Right, but in the same spirit as the hoisting discussion, like to tease apart them into separate things. I understand that the implementation in npm6 was buggy, but I'm clarifying that the arborist filtering implementation that's in npm7 would not be buggy in this regard, and so that semantic, if we went with it, would be solid. Is that correct?
But then we have to know from then we basically have to detect whether or not a lock file is present, not just when we're building the ideal tree, but when we're reifying and when we're diffing. So we have to go back and say, okay, I've got these two trees, I need to diff them. And instead say, I've got these two trees, I need to diff them. And did one of them come from a lock file or from the actual tree, or created from scratch from package.json or from some other place?
Right.
I guess you can.
Yeah, I guess it's just so to paraphrase, make sure I'm hearing right. You're saying
that we want to be pulling all the way through that process.
So you're saying adding the ability to do different things here, even if both things are individually fine. That branching behavior is the complexity you want to avoid.
The implicit branching behavior, yes.
Right.
If we want to make it explicit and say, okay, the user has indicated via some way, and we can, there's good and bad ways to express this, but the user has expressed that they wish X to happen, I will make X happen. That's totally fine. And that's very predictable and very consistent. Whether you have a lock file or not, regardless of where I got these two trees from, you're telling me that you only want to diff this portion of the graph. Great, I'll do that. And that's what like npm install -w foo will do, right? It'll only install foo workspace and its dependencies. I would actually be fine with saying, I mean, if npm7 hadn't already shipped with this behavior, I would be fine saying npm install foo only installs foo and its deps. We still build the entire ideal tree, but you've only asked me to reify this portion of it, so I'm only going to reify that portion of it.
So that's okay. That was my clarification. So given that,
I don't have a strong opinion on that portion of it. I do
would
have
it
a
be
strong
remotely
opinion on it being consistent.
Okay, so would it be remotely possible to make it leave it consistent now, but add a warning when somebody is relying on the absence of filtering, and then in npm8 remove, like, always do the filtering?
So leave it
because then the small group of people that haven't run npm install before they're running npm install foo will get a warning telling them, hey, you should run npm install first next time, because like in the future this will change. And then when npm 8 happens, that's the like it'll just do that. Is that like a possible path?
I mean,
Is that a desirable path though?
yeah, that's the
I-
question.
Yeah,
right,
I
I mean,
kind
It's
of
certainly
like.
possible. I don't.
I think
and
it's desirable.
Yes.
I think if
know.
I ask for it to install one thing, it should only install that one thing and nothing else. And it's a bug if it's doing more than that. And the auto prune behavior that npm install has adds an extra wrinkle. But even if that were fixed, like, and it wasn't hugely inconvenient, I would still think it's a bug that when I asked it to install one thing, it installed everything.
I may be more in the middle ground here. I think that if we got rid of the pruning, then npm install one thing would not necessarily be a bug. It would just be something we'd want to strongly document. But the pruning is a bug. That's my stance, I think.
I have a question that's related to this. When I npm install, Express, that, and I do have a package lock, does that also update the package lock and all of the resolved dependencies?
Yes.
Oh, I guess I
So-
just don't like package locks.
Well,
that
if
feels
you-
weird to me.
If Express is not a dependency,
Yeah.
and you run npm install Express,
hmm
yeah, we have to update the package lock because
But does it
wasn't there
update?
before and now it is.
So outside of Express, so like ignore Express. Like I have like, I don't know, React or something, and they have, there's a bunch of modules in React that aren't in Express, that aren't resolved by Express. Are all of those other dependencies also going to get resolved? Like, are they going to get updated? So like some dependency of
The
React
package lock, I understand. So
updated. Okay.
So we will not touch the portions of the package lock that are outside the portions of the tree that we're touching,
Okay.
right? So it's like the lock file is the starting point and gives us some metadata about the resolved and integrity values that we expect to encounter when we're resolving those things. If you're saying npm install Express, you're saying, okay, take the intended tree that's expressed in the lock file and add Express to it, and then make it valid. So if there's anything in that lock file that we then have to change, like maybe there's a version of, maybe you're already using a version of Connect, which isn't compatible with the version of Express you're doing, but we can upgrade it and still be within your dependency range. Okay, then that might change.
Yeah.
But if you're also depending on some other completely different thing, like we're just going to take what's there because we haven't been told to re-evaluate that particular edge.
Okay.
There may be cases where the only exception to that is if the data is missing, we'll fill it in. So if there's something that doesn't have an integrity value and then we reify it, we'll put that integrity value in because now we know it.
So in terms of steps to go forward here,
Yeah.
like, can we offer like an olive branch in or hopes of implementing this behavior behind a flag or something? Or what's the go for? Like, if we're saying that for us, this is not a bug, this is behavior in npm 7, and we
And sometimes in npm 6.
and sometimes in npm 6, but this is the stable behavior in npm 7.
Mhm.
Then if you want to opt into this other behavior, like, can we exercise some creativity here in terms of like what shape we could provide that in? Like,
Yeah, we need to design the user experience for that, and then the
Exactly.
implementation is pretty straightforward.
Tyranny.
Yeah.
okay, exactly what tyranny is. Yeah, exactly. Like an only flag or something. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's the feedback it sounds like to give. So action item is respond with option to introduce new content flag explicit behavior. Okay. So just to be mindful of time, and again, if folks have more that they want to add on this specifically, feel free to follow up in the threads itself, async. But I'm going to be moving on here to the fourth item we had, which was the issue 363, the RFC, which we spoke about a bit at length last week. Jordan's issue here about the npm ignore and get ignore sets of files. I forget where we landed with this or what the actions were, or if there were any action items.
I mean, I think we just nobody's like come up with a great suggestion of how to do it. Like the sense that I had from talking about it was like, if we can come up with a way that solves the back compat problems and doesn't create new ones, then like, great, but nobody knows exactly how to do that yet.
It sounded like we were like saying, well, you can write a tool that is like a pre-publish that can write to the files based on this information for you as well, right?
Right. And I guess, I mean, arguably, we could add that as an npm function, right? Like construct get ignore from this, or construct npm ignore from get ignore and this other file, right? And then that at least makes it really easy to add that functionality, and then it does crash in older npms. So that's actually something that just occurred to me that might work. But I'll try and put that on the RFC comment or the RFC thread, and we can talk about it there.
Something like that, if it's simple enough to actually propose like a POC almost, like
yeah,
it might even be better to debate the PR then and how that was implemented, because it would be fairly simple as far as I know, like that implementation. But yeah, go ahead, Isaac. I think I cut you off.
Well, you said what I was about to say. Spike implementation would be worthwhile, and the other bonus of doing it that way is you would have npx make npm ignore as a thing you could use today. And then we could decide, should this logic just live in npm pack list and be how it works if it sees both, or if it sees this pragma. But that will make it a lot easier to reason about.
Yeah, I think next step here is to actually do a little bit of work to see, so we can look at code maybe.
Yep.
If you're willing to invest some time there, Jordan, like we can talk about.
Willing, yes. Able is a question mark, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, those are definitely two separate things for sure. Okay. Awesome. So moving along then to PR 343. This is the RC on the workspace's context switching, basically running commands within a nested workspace or a child workspace that would then essentially operate that command as if it was run in the root. We've talked about this quite a bit over the last couple RC calls around, how to make this happen, or whether or not we should introduce a new file, which would essentially dictate where the workspace root was and provide a path to that. Roy, I'm not sure, because you've missed out on a few RFC calls, did you also want to maybe add more color than or context than I already have?
Yeah, I don't know if there was any discussion that I missed, but from where I remember this landed was the idea of having a configuration to kind of opt in to this behavior. And yeah, I think the only conversation that I would like to bring on is that I would prefer it to be the other way around. Like, would be, okay, maybe we have a configuration, but to opt out and make this the default, because I think for the majority of users out there, they would expect to just cd into their workspace and npm install foo and get that dependency added to their workspace, and things will be added to the project level package lock file and work as intended. So if it is an opt-in kind of thing, it would be more error prone to the standard user to just get that user experience out of the box. But yeah, I understand that it might be desirable for a subset of users. Then maybe we have the config, but to opt out of the default behavior.
So I think I was suggesting, like, there's one constraint that we have on workspaces which is preventing this now in a safe way, and that is that we make no changes within the workspace folder, right? So you can define a packages
The root or the
/foo,
child?
the child. So if you define a workspace, a child workspace, we don't touch it at all, really, except to install dependencies and occasionally to save updates to dependencies. But we if we could loosen that constraint, if we could put a file in the the child workspace project root that says dot workspace root and is a path to the the relative path to the workspace root, that would give us something very explicit to say, oh, when I run npm install in this folder, what I really am doing is running npm install -- prefix equals .. / workspace equals foo, right? And then it's just a matter of setting our prefix and setting two configs. It's not a big deal at all. The hard part is we need that explicit thing, because I don't want somebody to, I don't want to like put a package JSON in my root of my dev folder that has workspaces equals star, and then anything I do in any of those folders, it's always happening in a workspace mode. Like, it has to be something that you opt into. It has to be something that you opt into implicitly by setting it up as a workspace project, right?
Yeah, I sort of agree with the not going with the implicit route based on if I'm running npm commands in a folder, like, and it has no other context provided, there's no explicit like reference back to like some sort of workspace root, then I feel like I want to run as if I was not in a workspace, right? Like, I've CD'd into that folder and I want to execute some commands on there, like on that package JSON, right? That's my personal thought on that, is to not change that behavior based on that context. And we'd have to find the context too. We'd have to walk up and figure out whether or not you were part of a workspace project, right? So like, that's I think the problem with that. With that behavior as well. So I don't know if there's what the impetus is here as well. Like, how much of a blocker, let's say, of not having this feature of connecting, like, how, I guess we don't know and haven't had a ton of feedback about people having this problem where they've CD'd into a workspace directory and then tried to run a command and they had this unexpected experience. Like, I personally haven't been seeing a ton of feedback around that yet.
Wait a minute. Yeah, that's like 90% of all the complaints I hear, I see about workspaces across all the communities. As people setting up workspaces, then they CD into a child workspace folder and they try to npm install something, and they get a brand new node modules in there, an extra nested package lock, and everyone is confused. That's the number one complaint.
So I would love to get that data.
that will be also, it's not that big of a deal right now because it'll actually kind of still work. But if we start making these dependencies actually be symlinks because you've got this thing that's isolated or that thing that's not, oh goodness, that's going to be like even just CDing in and running npm ls and it says, nope, no deps here. Like, that's really not great. It should know to walk up the path.
which to be fair still occurs in those using 6 and Lerna. Like if I were to do
Yeah.
an npm-ls inside of like that is the already like experience you
No,
get
that
from
works
doing
fine in Lerna.
Lerna monorepo.
Enzyme is a Lerna monorepo, and npm-ls works just fine in each of the sub packages.
Interesting. I've done it several times and I still get and doesn't walk up the way it's expected to. That's a lot of our instances.
I mean, it doesn't walk up. It only shows me the npm-ls of the sub package. It doesn't show me anything above it, which is what I expect because I'm in the sub package.
Right, but it doesn't show you.
Well, what I'm saying is if I'm looking for a particular package with like the ls, then it does not know to go find that up above.
Right.
So yeah, like I would say, I guess I'm trying to prioritize this against like how quickly do we have to resolve this as well.
Yeah, I believe it probably, now it's probably the time that we're gonna be unlocked to start really putting this on the roadmap, because we're getting all the commands there, right? Especially
right,
npm install
that's
dash.
number one. In terms of number one, when you say
we need that.
feedback,
Yeah.
right.
So we need that first, the ability of running commands in specific workspaces, right? Like, but then once we have that, this would be an improvement over the experience, right? And my hope was to just fix that error for most of the users who are expecting this to be the default behavior.
So instead of doing something, and this is what my personal approach would be, instead of doing something on behalf of the user, why don't we communicate better? So it sounds like we could potentially still do the work to walk and find out if it looks like you're in a workspace project, but why not essentially output that and say, it looks like you're trying to run this command in a workspace project. Did you mean to run it in the root, right? Or something like along those lines of a standard output that we could be putting for commands that then doesn't take away the
which
choice
commands, because some of those commands, like semantically, it makes sense to cd into a project and run most of those commands and have them only apply to that project.
So most likely the reify commands that we have are the ones that are the most, as Roy was saying, the most challenging and the most confusing for end users. Probably those are the right set of commands that would have something along those lines. And we already have standard behavior that when we see workspace config for another set of commands that don't support workspaces at all, we're going to throw. So there's certain default behavior and sort of communication mechanisms I think we can put in place that will not take away, if I want to try to install in this project for whatever reason, and I want to actually generate a package log, don't stop me. Maybe you can tell me, you can prompt me, and there can right be in the console that it looks like you're running in a workspace, or that it looks like this is a part of another a project. But yeah.
I actually would want to always have a package lock in each child workspace, because diffing package locks to triage bugs is something that I do all the time, and I wouldn't want to have to do it at this encompassing every dep in the entire monorepo at the same time.
That's a really great idea. It's something that I think we've talked about internally a little bit, that we should have, whether we should have separate lock files for each thing within the workspaces project rather than having them all in the top level. Because right now it's just, everything is in one lock file. And Arborist only looks at the lock file from the root node. So splitting that up would be great for a lot of reasons. But that's also kind of a separate thing to, should CDing into a workspace and then running a command be effectively the same as, or actually the same as running the same command with the workspace flag at the root?
And that's the question that brings us back to the
Jordan,
original.
you were a potato there. We can hear you.
Yeah, your audio is cutting out. not sure if it's potato-like, but
Are you back, Jordan? Or did you totally cut out?
Thing of like their seeding into it and valid use cases for seeding into it and running a commit. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just talking about that they're both.
yeah, I'm not sure if it's the internet where you are. I've never listened to a potato before, but Tierney might be right. That sounds like potato.
As close as one can get.
Yeah. Just want to be mindful of time.
I do, yeah. Just to say, I do like your alternative, Darcy. I will add that at least to the alternative section of the RFC. I think it is a possible one. Did you mean, and then CD back into the root and run with the workspace flag. I think that could be helpful in educating the users that's a thing.
And again, like we could recommend the command to run. Like if you don't mean this, like, you know, like mean to do this type thing, like it, or like whatever. Yeah, it's about a communication and education, I think, in this space, versus just trying to always do what's, you know, we think is the implicit understanding for the 80-20 even, like, of developers. Let's like think about how instead we can, you know, educate them on how we think they should be using the tools anyways, and we don't always have to create functionality to like catch everybody, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Even to do that messaging, we need to know that there is a workspace root.
Oh yeah.
What it is. So
yeah, so you have to do the work, but like you have to do the work there. But my concern was, if you do the work to find out and then make the decision for the developer, that's what I don't like about like the implicit strategy there, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So moving on. So the action there, Roy, you're going to add some more alternatives, maybe.
Sounds good.
Based on discussion there, and it sounded like Jordan had a couple things that you want to add. Hopefully you can add them async to the RFC as well. I wanted to give some time here because we only have about 5 minutes left. So I moved up, Tierney, your RFC 182. So this is NPM audit licenses. Did you want to speak to the work? Yeah.
Yeah. Seems to be going pretty well. I owe licensee a PR that I haven't gotten to because I've been doing interviews for the past week. And by interviews, I mean interviewing people, not interviewing myself. I owe that a PR to change whitelist to allow list. I don't think there's any block list in there, but the big one there is just discussion about like in a dot, what was it? I'm failing to remember the audit.json or package.json, and or both, and choosing the path there to codifying the RFC. I believe Jordan had an opinion on it. I don't care. I'm happy to write whatever people want. So I am happy to change it. I generally lean toward allowing multiple different avenues to the same thing. So I proposed both and having them both be allowed. But if there's reasons to do one over the other, that's totally fine.
Okay. Has anybody else had a chance to look at the updated RFC and had comments, concerns? No?
Yeah, if people could look at it, super appreciated, and then also look at it with that question in mind, also super appreciated. So
in terms of time frame, like if we agreed on sort of like the approach, would you be able to spend time like working on the actual implementation? It sounds like you had already been playing with this.
So I had been playing with this as a separate module that I built myself that was not licensee. I'd be happy to work on, on this with someone from the CLI team. I don't know how you would want to approach it, whether you'd want to like shell out to it, or whether you'd want to consume it as a module and re-implement the API's commands. But happy to try to spend some time on this if that's helpful. For sure.
Yeah, I think so. Like, again, it's one of those cases where if we get the spike together now, it's easier to actually, like, based on how much discussion we've had around this, it'd be easier to look at a PR with the actual code like implemented, and then we can massage it into a form that we think is good. Based on there's like a lot of prior art as well that like hopefully there isn't a ton of work to like implement. Like just pulling in, I guess, licensee and massaging that into like a subcommand. So yeah, so if you can take that away, I'll also try to get some time to review that RFC, see if there's like anything that stands out. But cool. We had two other items here. Unfortunately, Nilf, I don't think was able to join. We've talked about his, it seems pretty uncontroversial, his RFC 336. The only thing here is the actual name of the config. So being able to specify where for npm config and npm exec look, which directories they're looking at are, you know, it seems pretty uncontroversial other than naming. So like we might just want to like shed that in some sort of poll. I think that was maybe one of the action items we had from last week. So it just needs to get done. And then issue number 156, the RRC optional installs. I believe this is, we had followed up in this thread, or at least I had, about the potential for filtered installs once we land workspace awareness for some of the reify commands later this week or next week. This might be an option for them to utilize workspaces essentially to parse out different types of depths that they have and they want to essentially install. That might be an option for them. I think I might remove this from the agenda unless other folks have comments on that specifically.
Isn't this almost a complete overlap of the install single package? Like solving this could solve, I mean, it seems to me they want basically what we do with omit and exclude for the package instead of the package type. Wouldn't that solve both problems?
They want like sets, defined sets of dependencies that they can install.
I will push back very hard on like a new or an arbitrary set of blessed top level dependency sets. That's
yeah, we talked about that before. And yeah, that's not going to happen. That's
a super big hazard. There's there's too many of those things already, and they each have very, very precise and defined semantics, which it would be unclear like what if you define something like optional dev dependencies or E2E dependencies, like is that required? Should that be at what point should that be installed? Like now we need to track those flags all the way through the tree. Like, oh, it's brutal. It's only reasonable now because there's such a small number of them. Having a way to install something and just limit it to only certain top level nodes, like that's kind of what they want. It's a little more like verbose than what they're asking for. They're asking for kind of some sugar on top of that, but we should deal with that later and shut this RFC down, I think.
Yeah.
Not that it's a bad use case, it's just we're not going to go in that direction.
Yeah, this is just an issue at the moment, just conversation too.
Sure.
But I can probably close it out with that feedback. So we're essentially at time, a little bit over. Apologize for getting started late. I appreciate everybody jumping on though today, as usual. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. And feel free to open up and keep the conversation going in the RFCs themselves. So I'll talk with you folks online and async and next week. Cheers.